Hey everyone, today I'm going to be telling you about the Living Bible. I'm going to be specifically looking at the marketing and the publisher of the Living Bible. And so the Living Bible is a paraphrase of the American Standard Version, not a translation, created by Kenneth Taylor. The language used in this version of the Bible is a plain, modern, and easy to understand text. Taylor used this to his benefit, crafting a Bible that spoke to the modern evangelical. And in the process, he built a publishing empire called Tindo House. So this Bible was crafted and marketed to be a commodity, created for commercial consumption. So Living Bible was really the first evangelical attempt not only to produce a commodity that consumers want, but to influence what consumers want. So I'll tell you more. So Kenneth Taylor was a minister's son and completed a doctorate of theology. He worked for several magazines and small publishers like Moody Publishing, once known as Moody Press. And Taylor started his career really with thinking about making easy-to-read Bible stories for children. I think this really got his wheels turning for creating Bibles that were family-focused and easy to understand. His experience at Moody Press also informed his knowledge on what Christian consumers want in regards to both Bibles and book genres. Taylor also founded the Christian Booksellers Association with a friend, and this would greatly benefit him in the future. And so Taylor went on to become the founder of Tindo House Publishers. He originally started Tindo House because he could not find anyone to publish a Living Bible. It was rejected by multiple publishers, and so he decided to publish Living Letters, his first attempt at producing a Bible, which was the paraphrased epistles, on his own. And so Tindo House Publishers was launched in 1962, running out of Taylor's family home in Carroll Stream, Illinois. And so as an interesting aside, according to Taylor, who was a middle-class conservative, the first publishers to reject the living word were conservative as well, favoring literal word-for-word translation. And so I'll show you exactly how the tides changed in his favor. So in an incredible stroke of luck, Billy Graham publicly endorsed Living Letters in 1963 on his television show Hour of Decision. This sealed the deal for the Living Bible to become an overwhelming success. The Living Letters and later the Living Bible became incredibly popular in evangelical circles, and Billy Graham initially requested 50,000 copies of the Living Letters for his crusades. Over the course of a couple years, over 650,000 copies were distributed during these crusades. The Billy Graham Evangelistic Association went on to give millions and millions of copies of the Living Bible away. And just a note about Billy Graham crusades. Graham put on hundreds of these events at large venues with altar calls, and many, many Bibles were given away. There was an emphasis on student ministry as well. And so these events were essentially like tent revivals and reached millions upon millions of people, and were also televised. So what do you think about the connotation of calling these events crusades? And so on this slide, the picture in the bottom right is of Kenneth Taylor and Billy Graham holding a copy of the Living Bible, specifically a Crusades edition. Also here, Crusades edition as well. So you're beginning to see how many editions were produced of both the Living Letters and the Living Bible. And so continuing on the endorsement, Billy Graham really valued this book's easy readability. So just a quick quote here from Taylor's son, Mark, that is now the president and CEO of Tindo House. Billy Graham recognized the value of a translation that reads like today's newspaper. I like that he calls it a translation here. And so also on this slide, you can see a special edition of the Living Bible made specifically for Billy Graham, Crusades, called One Way. Again, another Crusades edition. These would have been given out for free to those who came forward during altar calls at crusade events. All right, so Tindo House, as I mentioned, began very humbly in the early 60s and grew to become the largest Christian publisher in the world. It still is. Even in the early 70s, Tindo House relied very heavily on market research and targeted advertising. In their research efforts, they discovered mothers and wives were often the ones making the decision on which Bible to purchase for their family. The research revealed that the typical housewife was most concerned with instilling moral, social, and religious boundaries in her children. This led to the Mother Junior ad campaign that was specifically for the Living Bible and highlighted the ease of use for children. This was put on during, I guess, women's television programming. So the Living Bible in its entirety was finally printed by Tindo House Publishers in 1971 and was a bestseller due to its ease of use. I mean, bestseller literally overnight. Many editions and styles of Living Bible were released, and I'll attempt to highlight as many of these as I can during this presentation. And so Tindo House also attracted such authors as Tim LaHaye, David Wilkerson, and James Dobson in the early 70s. Just as points of reference here, Dobson started Focus on the Family. LaHaye wrote the Left Behind series, and Wilkerson was famous for his book, The Cross and the Switchblade. The Dobson book I have on this slide is a Tyndale treasure called Discipline with Love. Yikes. This is representative of what kind of child rearing he was advocating for in his work. So I hope this gives you an idea of the type of material Tindo House has published, along with some of the images I've shared on this slide, like the Bride's Book of Ideas for Christian Homemaking. All right, so Living Gospels editions. I just wanted to share these to show you the sheer number of editions and living translations that were produced. These are for the Gospels only, and also Acts of the Apostles, and more specifically produced for teenage audiences. So Rebel with a Cause is, of course, the best one in the bunch, right? The amount of marketing that was done for living translations was immense. Remember how I talked about creating commodities that consumers want? All right, so marketing of the Living Bible. According to Taylor, a readable Bible can revitalize our time. And he was very right. The Living Bible wrote a perfect storm of renewed evangelical vigor coupled with capitalist aspiration. During the 1960s, an emphasis on consumer-oriented sensibilities arose as consumer markets expanded and consumer choice drew upon evangelical ideas that to make mass consumption socially acceptable. According to Daniel Vaca, the Living Bible manifested evangelicalism's social logic. It affirmed readers' authority over and against Biblicism's conventions. So remember how I mentioned that Taylor started the Christian Booksellers Association? It came to seriously benefit him in the marketing of the Living Bible. It opened the doors for him to distribute not only with corporate partner Doubleday and through Christian bookstores, but through major chain stores as well, like you see on this slide. So we have Walmart, Walden Books, B. Dalton, Barnes & Noble, JCPenney, etc. I'll share with you a Doubleday ad on the next slide. The Christian Booksellers Association also helped to elevate his reputation and calm any concerns about paraphrased Bibles by publishing articles addressing this through his journals. The author of one article wrote, "Today's American who thinks and lives differently than the writers of the scriptures can understand exactly what God meant." He went on to say that a careful paraphrase is perhaps safer than word-for-word translation. Wow. Christianity Today in 1979 assured readers that the Living Bible was the people's choice. And they had a full-page ad saying it was the people's choice. By 1997, 40 million copies had been sold. Amazingly, from the very beginning of his publication, Taylor had assigned the copyright to Tindo House Foundation. So all of the royalties from sales of the Living Bible were given to charity, specifically through the publishing house's foundation. And so pictured on this slide is a late 90s version touting the 40 million sales. And I thought this was funny down here. Once you start reading the Living Bible, you won't be able to put it down. Sounds like marketing to me. All right, and so here's the Doubleday ad I mentioned earlier with another endorsement from Billy Graham. A paraphrased edition promises a new understanding of the scriptures and renewed interest and inspiration. Okay. So children's editions. So part of Taylor's desire to create a paraphrase of the Bible was for children to be able to easily understand the text. He was a father of 10, and so teaching the children Bible stories was of heavy emphasis to him. And so again, you can see here the sheer volume of editions created using the Living Translation. So we have illustrated editions, gift editions, there's even a Catholic edition right here in the center. Okay, so more youth editions. I have to highlight for you the 70s teen edition of the Living Bible called The Way. The Way came out in 1972 and is an illustrated version edited by Campus Life magazine, Youth for Christ International. So another version called Reach Out came out in 1976, also illustrated, but it was only the New Testament. So both offered very chatty, approachable language in their introductions, along with fun photos of other super groovy teens, as you see here. There's also a Catholic edition of The Way. And so Legacy. An updated version of the Living Bible was created in partnership with the 700 Club called The Book. This came out in the mid-80s. It was branded as a hip version of the Bible, and it was marketed like a best-selling novel rather than a Bible. It was a huge success because of this. And One Year Bible also came out, which was the study Bible version of the book. In the late 80s through mid-90s, McGee and Me, a popular children's show in the Left Behind series, a very evangelical novel series about the end times for adults, came out through Tindo House, and this solidified the publishing company as an evangelical media mogul. Just a fun note, the Left Behind series is based in premillennial dispensationalism. Does that ring a bell? And so in 1996, there was an attempt to revise the Living Bible called the New Living Translation. So this version was produced in 1996 and relied heavily on dynamic equivalence as its translation method. The translators utilized original Greek and Hebrew texts, but there was still a major emphasis on accessibility and readability for modern readers. The New Living Translation remains very popular, and there are very many editions of this, just like the Living Bible. Incarcerated men and women are now given a specific version of the NLT called the Life Recovery Bible, which is also printed and distributed by Tindo House. Okay, Jesus and John Wayne. So if you're wondering how Tindo House, Billy Graham, Tim LaHaye, James Dobson, and the Bible as a consumer commodity all fit together and relate to capitalism, I highly recommend you pick up a copy of Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Kobes-Dumais. Her book tracks the rise of the evangelical right along with consumer culture and a conservative Christian political agenda. I consider it a must-read if you're interested in the things that I have touched on in this presentation. All right, thanks so much.